If you're watching this video, you can thank Globalization for that. If you're backing this channel or have done so in the past or consider doing so in the future, and you don't live in Romania, well, you can thank Globalization for that too. Not everything that starts with global is bad in and of itself. And really, globalization is not such a new phenomenon either. It's thousands upon thousands of years old and has been, generally at least, a net benefit for humanity. Let's explore. Hello everyone, and welcome to another installment of Freedom Alternative Research and Analysis. Okay, this one is going to be quite short. So, right after the US election was called for Trump, I uploaded an impromptu video in which I said the following.
He basically said that we are witnessing our world splitting and being destroyed right in front of our eyes. And the thing is that the French ambassador is correct. The world that he and all the people like him, the world that they built, this what now it's been colloquially named as globalist, which is whatever. It's a decent term, not the most perfect, not the best term possible.
And I actually meant it. Whilst I do understand that a term had to be found, a term that wasn't New World Order, and a term that could actually stick into the culture, it is nonetheless imperfect that the term globalism eventually emerged. And the reason I say this is because it risks creating confusions. In fact, the main reason I make this video is precisely because there already are individuals who lean towards thinking that globalism and globalization are the same thing. And who can blame them? It's a sneaky term that does generate confusion. Now, the explanation is thankfully pretty straightforward. Globalization is voluntary and it's a gradual process that's been going on for at least 2,500 years, probably even more than that, but let's leave it like that, 2,500 years since with Rome, basically. For instance, the fact that we're using Arabic numbers is a result of globalization. The fact that we're using fireworks on New Year is the result of globalization. Basically, globalization is a perpetual process of cultural appropriation. And remember, cultural appropriation is fundamentally good. It's how science and art and, to a certain extent, philosophy tends to work. We take ideas and motifs from one culture and then create things that are better than the parts that we already borrowed from one or another culture. Now, the main semblance between globalism and globalization is that they both have a cultural and a political component. The main difference between the two is that globalism is mandatory and globalization is not. Or maybe I should put it this way. In globalization, you get to pick and choose what you like and want to apply and what you don't like and don't want to apply. Under globalism, there is no such choice. Now, in addition to the plain bad ideas and policies that are promoted under the current globalist incarnation, because again, this is not the first attempt, nor the last one for that matter, but in addition to the plain bad ideas, the biggest problem of the current globalist project is the sheer arrogance. The arrogance of politically correct cucks who not only firmly believe that they know better than you and I how we should live our lives, but they should be anointed into imposing their vision upon everyone else. The fact of the matter is that most good ideas can and indeed do spread without any force involved. Most of the world, for instance, drives on the right. Most of the world uses 220 up to 240 volt standard for electric outlets. Sure, there's still some bickering about the plug standards, but the voltage is more or less standardized globally. Yet there is no International Driving on the Right organization or the World Plugs organization that drives these things. They just spread because they are by far the most widely accepted and acceptable trade-offs, whilst at the same time allowing for differences to still exist. Or let me try with some more serious examples. For instance, most countries allow a remarkably high degree of freedom on the internet, and it's not because most governments want that, but because they have to. The consumers drive most of these things. Now sure, there are sadly exceptions to this, but the list of exceptions is relatively small. There is a much wider acceptance today than probably there has ever been in human history of ideas such as freedom of the press. For instance, nobody forced the Republic of Kyrgyzstan, for instance, to not only allow but fully embrace press freedom. It was through globalization that gradually more and more individuals were persuaded by the benefits. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is that if an idea is good enough, it will gradually become policy in more and more places, regardless of whether it's an idea about politics, or an idea about outlet voltages, or an idea about USB ports, or it doesn't really matter. However, it is also true that certain ideas will probably never become policy on their own, and most of these ideas are genuinely cancer. Gay marriage, for instance, is one such idea. As you can see on the map, a tiny minority of the world population lives under such a policy, and this is very unlikely to change anytime soon, and probably never. And even in the areas colored in deep blue, a significant chunk of the populace actively disagrees and opposes the idea. In the United States, it is my contention that the majority of Americans oppose the idea, but just like with abortion, the issue of activist judges stands in the way between individuals working out their disagreements peacefully rather than by government violence and government fiat. Now, the reason I'm giving these examples is because globalism comes a lot more with the latter category of ideas, that would be the cancer type of ideas, rather than the former. Look, now while we are at non-straight causes, let's take another one. The decriminalization of homosexuality, for instance, is an idea that has spread without any coercion much faster and much wider than the idea of gay marriage. The reason is pretty much the same. If an idea makes sense, more and more people will adopt it gradually through the non-violent and voluntary process of globalization. On this map, the countries marked in blue and gray are countries where homosexuality is not criminalized. According to progressives and globalists, the countries marked in gray are oppressive. According to conservatives, the countries marked in red are oppressive. Although this map is not entirely accurate, this one, for instance, is a lot more accurate. The countries marked in yellow are countries where homosexuality is technically illegal, but the punishment is never enforced. So really, the issue is with a minority of the world, and soon India will also turn gray on this map too, so population-wise, a supermajority of the planet will be living in a highly tolerant environment. Genuine tolerance as opposed to leftist tolerance. Now, I use this example because it illustrates impeccably the difference between globalization and globalism. Thanks to globalization, the overwhelming majority of the planet has noticed that it is a waste of societal resources, in addition to being immoral, to imprison consenting adults based on how they choose to have sex in the privacy of their homes or on legitimately operated property. Globalists, however, are not happy. In a globalist vision, the idea is to force all the people everywhere not only to tolerate, but to actively support and kiss up to the whole degeneracy bag of the LGBTist lobby. And this is why I'm a fan of globalization and not a fan of globalism. Good ideas tend to spread anyway. No need for force and no need for worldwide governments. Just like we settle our differences individually and nationally, the same occurs globally too, albeit slower. No need for coercion if an idea is genuinely good. But progressives have ideas so good that they need to be mandatory. And that's why they suck. Here's another example, and then we can wrap this up. Decriminalization of marijuana. Now, this map used to be almost entirely red just 20 years ago. Just in the last 10 years, more than half of the world turned either pink, which means the penalties are simply not enforced, or orange, which means it's no longer a crime to possess it, though technically it still remains illegal to deal it. Now, that did not come about as a result of a UN or an European Union or a WHO resolution to push marijuana rights. No. This happened as a result of globalization. Peer-to-peer individuals around the world have gradually adopted the idea that wasting societal resources to jail people for smoking a plant is just dumb. Now, that doesn't mean pot is a fantastic idea. It really isn't. The pro-weed lobby is completely mental and out of touch with reality in and of itself, but that's a separate topic for another day. However, jailing people for using it is simply dumb because it helps no one, well, except maybe for the cartels, and it creates even more violence. On the long run, basically everyone is worse off. Now, this realization occurred gradually as a result of billions upon billions of small conversations amongst people all over the world. Some of those people are police officers or members of various bureaucracies. That's how you have such a large swath of pink on that map. Eventually, most of the map will turn blue. It will take decades, but it will be far more decisive and a lot more fair than to have the United Nations starting to blackmail countries into doing it without too much discussion. So, bottom line. Globalization is the free exchange of ideas and practices that oftentimes, gradually, through peer-to-peer persuasion and the power of example, convince more and more people, which eventually leads to a change in how most people, most of the times, do things, whilst still allowing for differences to exist. Globalism is basically the opposite of this. Globalism is the not-so-gradual and oftentimes brutal process of subverting or forcing individuals in power to impose a will on all the people and force a change in how most people most of the times do things, whilst not allowing any meaningful difference to exist. In short, globalization is libertarian, globalism is authoritarian. It's really that simple. And with that being said, this concludes another episode of Research and Analysis. Please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. Many thanks to the constant and generous support offered by the patrons and donors of this channel. You guys are really awesome. And I guess I'll see you around on Freedom Alternative.